Good evening, church. I said, good evening, church. There you are. I knew you had it in you. Give me just a second here. No, don't make any jokes. What is this? Footstool. Move this out of the way. Here we are. Perfect. Let me put those there. Acts chapter 22, starting in verse 1, says, Brethren and fathers, hear my defense, which I now offer to you. And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew dialect, they became even more quiet. And he said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated under Gamaliel, strictly according to the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, just as you all are today. I am excited to be here with you this evening. I hope that you are well. I know that there are many that are not well. I know several of our families here are sick, or their children are sick. And if that is the case and you're watching this remotely, we want you to know that our prayers are for you and that we miss you, but we are glad that you are tuned in. Whether you're watching this in the live stream or you're watching this during the week at a later time, we want you to know that God loves you and that we believe that God is at work all around you as He is in work all around us to bring about a greater completion in what He wants for our life. And so with that, we are very, very encouraged. A couple of weeks ago, we learned that our shepherdship, I guess we could call it, we have decided, the shepherds have decided to be called shepherds instead of elders, which I genuinely appreciate because it accentuates the relational aspect, I believe, of the role. They announced their plans for beginning the next shepherd selection and specifically seeking your participation in that process for recognizing those who might serve us as shepherds and leaders in this congregation. This morning's lesson focused on, I guess, what some would call qualifications. I never have really liked to call the passage list in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1 that personally. Not that I think that it's wrong to call it that. I think on some level it definitely qualifies a person to be considered, but I don't like calling them qualifications. I prefer characteristics or qualities, whereas the inside person is being focused on in contrast perhaps to a list. But nonetheless, that's what we looked at this morning. And so I want to start out by asking you, what stood out to you this morning from Mike's lesson? What do you remember? What stood out to you? What encouraged you from this morning's message? Character of the individual? Yes?
These are Christian qualities that we're talking about. It's not limited.
That's wonderful. These are Christian qualities. Not the application isn't to exclude everybody else. After all, we are called to imitate those who have charge over us. Yes? That's what the Bible, it's what my book tells me. And therefore, if they are to embody such characteristics, then we should too as their followers, right? So very good. It isn't just for the leaders. The things we're speaking about isn't just for the leaders. It's for everybody. I will add to that by saying that actually you can take each one, and though we're not going to do it this evening, I have in the past taken each one of those characteristics and found other New Testament verses that would encourage Christians to obtain or have those same characteristics. I think what separates the shepherd being considered and the congregant, if you will, is that the shepherd is able to embody and exemplify those on a very obvious level, if that makes sense. But they aren't just limited to the brethren, the shepherds. They are for everybody. Good. What else? What else stood out to you? What else encouraged you this morning?
Those characteristics aren't as rigid as people would often have us think.
Right. Right. And I believe that I think our Bible teachers in this class, in this auditorium right now would agree that even a superficial examination of what those words mean in the Greek would lend itself to that. What's that old country singer? Mike, you made me think of this morning. Rodney, somebody finish. He's an old country singer. His first name's Rodney, or maybe his last name's Rodney. What's that? No, it ain't Atkins. What's that? No. I'm a stand by my woman, man. Oh, I can't remember. What is it? Millsap. There we go. Ronnie Millsap. That's a one-woman man, right? And so that's the idea, for example, of something that has been twisted and looked at. I think we're missing the point if we are simply looking to see how many wives that he's had. We're trying to look at the person.
Can I make a comment? I was going to say, preachers always forget something they had planned on saying. One thing I was going to say this morning about that, one of the dangers of doing a checklist kind of thing when we get to
Sure.
start looking for
Sure.
people, you say, well, they've only been married one time. Okay, good, we're good to go. Just because somebody has only been, there are people who have only been married one time who are not one-woman men. We're talking about the character of the person that he's devoted to his current spouse.
Right. Faithfulness.
One time doesn't necessarily mean that.
Yeah. Faithfulness. Is he faithful to his spouse? And I would say as we consider what a godly household is supposed to look like based upon, the New Testament passages, namely Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 33, we would want that person being considered to embody those characteristics. So faithfulness in terms of, what God's intent is for the marriage relationship. But good point. This morning's lesson, and I enjoyed it, Mike, did a great job. To me, this morning, and I'm glad we need to talk about it, it focused on the character, and again, we need to talk about that. This evening, I want you to keep the characteristics, the qualities, if you will, in mind, but I want to focus on something that's slightly different, and that is the process that leads to those qualities or those those characteristics. Not so much the product, but the process that would lead us to have those qualities or characteristics. And what I'm talking about is the development of Christian character as seen in a leader. And so I want to ask you, I know we went through a lot of different qualities or characteristics this morning, but I want to ask you, what do you think are the most important qualities of a good or a healthy leader? And let me just save you the Bible answer. Oh, all of the ones that the Bible says, or all of them are equal. They are all equally important. But I'm asking you which one you think are most important. Integrity. Okay, just a minute. And how would you define integrity? Carrie? Doing the right thing regardless of your own personal opinion, personal feelings, regardless of where you're at, regardless of who is present, regardless if everybody else is doing it or if nobody else is doing it. They have to be integrous. Good. Mike, you said loving, people-oriented. Oh, man. Very good, yes. If you want to be a leader and you don't like being around people or be in the people business, then you have no business leading in the church. You have to be about people. Good. What else? Who else? Anybody else? Have to have a heart that's on fire for the Lord. Has to have a desire, a strong desire. I think that is in the text that we looked at this morning, 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1, right? Yes. What else? As you think about what we've studied now, is this the third week, Mike? I think this is the third week. The third week in this mini-series on leadership, and you've had, this would be the sixth lesson on it. What characteristics or qualities do you think are most important, or the things that stand out to you the most? You go, this is what I think a leader really needs to embody.
Servant is one of them. Definitely have to be a servant. If you're not a servant, you're not a leader. You may have the title, but you're not a leader.
But you're not a leader. You have to want to serve others. Mike, and then Ken.
I was just thinking about something you said in the leadership class about the sheep and the shepherd, about how the sheep know the shepherd's voice. I think that's pretty important.
Yes, the sheep know his voice, and he knows their voice. And so what that accentuates or highlights is a mutual relationship. We know each other. It's possible to partially know somebody, by reading a bulletin or a directory, or by visiting with somebody else that might know an individual. But if there's mutual knowledge of one another, that would accentuate there's a relationship. Ken?
Well, pretty similar to that. One of the qualities that is specifically listed is the ability to teach. I think as a leader, you have to teach those that are following. It's not just orders. It's not just commands. It is walking with them and teaching as you go.
Yes.
And if you remember when
Thank you. Yes.
What's the question? What's the answer to the question when he says, "Do you love me?" What's Jesus' response to that? Feed my sheep. Tend to my sheep.
Love my sheep. So, great. And I appreciate your words on teaching because last time I checked, they didn't have buildings till about the middle of the 4th century, at least in terms of the way that we think about them. Hence, they didn't have classroom setting. Teaching wasn't marker board, writing it out, assembly, Bible class, etc. Certainly, it has to then mean more than what we probably think about it. I think if I understood you right, that's exactly right. Hey, there's my wife. We have a round of applause. It is good to see you. Okay. My daughter's at the house right now. She's not feeling well, but for those that were wondering, she wasn't here this morning because she was at home. But so we said integrous, we said loving, we said they have to have passion and have a strong desire about what they're doing. They have to be servants. They have to have mutual relationship, and we talked about them teaching. Question, follow-up question, is how do they acquire that? Practice? Study? Somebody has to lead them? Okay. Here it is. Where's Timothy? Is he over there? There he is. Leaders are not born. Leaders are formed and forged within a spiritual context. And that's what I want to talk about when we talk about leadership development. And I want to talk about it from a passage that we probably really don't think about leadership development from. And that is in Acts chapter 22. The first thing that I want to point out to you is this, is that your environment has a lot to do with your development. I'm excited that we are talking about leadership and have been for the last 3 weeks. There are a few things that if I were searching for a church that I would be looking for that would be determinants of my decision to worship there. There's few things that make a church a strong church in my mind. And in a church intentionally trying to develop the next generation of leaders is one of them. I hope that there are some men in this room who might not yet consider themselves to be qualified for a shepherdship, but perhaps has a desire in their heart to be leaders one day within the church. If that is you, if you are watching this, or if you are present and listening to this, then I hope you get this point. Because your development as a Christian leader has a lot to do with the context or the environment in which you intentionally place yourself in or under. Your development has a lot to do with your environment. And it's something that I believe we see right here in Acts chapter 22. Listen to what the New Testament author Luke writes. As he records Paul's defense before the Jews. He says, "Brothers and fathers, hear my defense, which I now offer to you." And when they heard that he was addressing them in the Hebrew dialect, they became even more quiet. And he said, You see that asterisk? The NASB does us a favor by putting the asterisk there, because what that does is to the reader, it should heighten awareness. This is where the camera would zoom in and the music would stop. It is intended to communicate vividness. It's what they call the historical present in the Greek. And so here it is. He says, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city, educated under Gamaliel, strictly according to the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, just as you all are today. Now, this is the Apostle Paul that is speaking. Question, would you say that Paul was a good leader? I mean, besides Jesus, could you think of a more well-known leader in the New Testament church than the Apostle Paul? I would be hard-pressed to think of anybody that would rival Paul in terms of leadership effectiveness. Spirit-led, word-based, cross-shaped, advocate and example of Christian sacrifice. It's not always easy to do the Christian thing. He talked about this, yes, while demonstrating humility, patience, and gentleness. Spirit endowed, miracle working, author of almost half of your New Testament. And depending on if you think he had anything to do with the writing of Hebrews, over half of your New Testament. Disciple maker? Yes. Disciple making, disciple maker. Systems builder. I mean, he wrote the manual, if you will, or the Great Commission of leadership. And if you're wanting to know what my Great Commission for leadership is, it's found in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. If you're an aspiring leader, if you're thinking about becoming a shepherd, if you think that your name is going to be put forward to be a shepherd, and that's something that you have a strong desire for, then you need to get your heart and your mind wrapped around Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 16. Because it spells out very plainly what the role of a leader looks like. It's within this text that Paul gives us something, gives us insight into his leadership. Question, do you think that Paul became Paul overnight? No, he didn't, did he? In fact, I believe this text teaches us about Paul's leadership development. He says, I am a Jew. That is, he was born a Jew. His entire heritage, his entire upbringing is immersed and embedded within a Jewish culture. Yes? His entire upbringing is embedded within a covenantal relationship with God. Circumcised on the 8th day for the purpose of declaring that spiritual relationship with Jehovah. Brought up in Jerusalem. Brought up, that's what it says. Brought up in this city, which he's in Jerusalem. Meaning he was raised in Jerusalem, which was the very heartbeat of Jerusalem. Of Judaism. Brought up, raised in a Jewish household where he grew up according to the practices of the law. Knowing and doing the will of God would have been central in his house. Taught the Scriptures from a very, very early age. And then he sat under somebody, didn't he? What do we know about Gamaliel? Pretty prominent person. He was the teacher. In fact, the school that the Pharisees went through was his school. He was of the first order of the Sanhedrin. Now, for those that don't know, the Sanhedrin is the Supreme Court. You know, this isn't Gamaliel, this is Gamaliel's grandfather. Gamaliel's grandfather was one of the people that was a key developer in the Jewish traditional law, the Talmud and the Mishnah. This is his grandfather, the first order of the Sanhedrin. And for what it's worth, Gamaliel is referred to by his contemporaries in the historical writings, commentaries of the Talmud as the glory of the law. At the age of 13, the Apostle Paul would have sat under Gamaliel for the start of his rabbinic training. This is who Paul is. This is how Paul became Paul. My point is from the very beginning of Paul's life, he was immersed into a spiritual context. His environment was one that was spiritual. In his development as a leader of the people, his people, was a reflection of the investment that he made in that spiritual environment. Now, I'm not at all suggesting that you have to be a scholar and you have to sit under the scholar of scholars in order to be a leader in God's church. But what I want to make abundantly clear is if you think that you can be a leader without making a spiritual investment and intentionally putting yourself into spiritual environments, then you were mistaken. Your environment has a lot to do with your development. So, here's a question. Can you think of any pathways where spiritual growth can take place? Pathways of spiritual growth. Perhaps context might help you understand the question. Any spiritual environments that can help a person who's aspiring to be a spiritual leader grow and develop.
I can only speak for myself. My parents, the ones that were around.
Parents? Yes. It starts early. Sure.
Then wherever you start doesn't make any difference. It's where you end.
Right.
And so you've got to be willing to please God, to study, to be the man that God wants you to be.
Okay, so you're right. We don't want to overspeak just because you weren't raised in church. By the way, I wasn't raised in church. And there's many here who would identify as being a person who was raised in a home that wasn't overtly Christian. But you had mentioned something there, Steve. You said, but if you study, so what type of environment would encourage studying? You have your daily readings, your daily devotionals, personal study. Yes? Christian home.
Sometimes we put men in situations, and they might, blow it up the first time. But through practice, what I said earlier, they'll get better at it.
Right.
But they got to be willing to work at it and try. Study is a byproduct of being willing to work. Don't be lazy.
Right.
Not be wanting to be involved with people, like we said, and not wanting to be pleasing to God.
You know, deacons, the Bible says that they have to be tested. One translation says they have to be proved in order to be a deacon. It's one of the qualities is they are already putting themselves out there. I think what I hear you saying, Steve, is yes, there's a classroom aspect to this, but there's also a practical. And I would think that, volunteering, you're talking about having a spirit and an attitude for it, a desire for it, that volunteering to be involved is certainly one of the environments in which a person is able to grow. Good. What else? What are some other pathways or environments or contexts that would enable or encourage a person to grow spiritually? Being here in this building every time the doors open. Bible class, worship, right? Special events, teaching or learning.
I was going to say teaching because I'm convinced that if you teach, you actually learn more than you ever impart to your students. So teaching to me is a tremendous way to spiritually grow.
Yes. In Sturgis, we had what we called LTGs. Life Transformation Groups. And these are small groups. It's when maybe 2, 3, or 4 at max, men or women would get together to ask each other questions of accountability for areas that either he or she would be struggling in. So accountability groups. Yes? How about mentoring relationships? Leadership development is no solo act. You have to allow yourself to be tutored by somebody. Yes? Good. What else? Somebody was going to say something over here. Ken?
So, I think a lot of what we miss when we talk about fellowship is this personal interaction. A lot of what happens with Paul is who he's around. It's not because he said, hey, come here, we need to sit down and have it. It was simply being with Paul is what's going to teach a Luke and a John Mark and a
Sure.
Timothy.
And I would guess, Ken, I agree with you through and through. I think that availability is right. Is absolutely essential. I also think that Paul understood himself to be a mentor, and those that he brought underneath his wings understood the type of relationship that he had with them. Right? Mentor-mentee relationship. And I don't think Paul said, hey, I'm the mentor. I think that was assumed, though. Small groups, life groups. Many of you know I was up in South Dakota for 11 years and would try to put out 3 or 4 newsletters in which you would receive. We had a small group ministry. We called them connect groups. But this was another environment that people could engage personally with other people. But there has to be a desire. In fact, in Acts chapter 20, in verse 28, Paul says this to the elders. He says, "Be careful for yourselves." The NASB says, "Take heed to yourselves and for all the people God has given you." The Holy Spirit gave you the work of caring for this flock. You must be shepherds to the church of God, the people He brought in He bought with His own blood. And so shepherds have a responsibility to tend to themselves, to grow and to develop themselves. Ministers, evangelists, that's what me and Mike and Tyler are. That's the New Testament word for our role, is evangelist. It says, be careful in your life and in your teaching. Continue to live and teach rightly. Then you will save yourselves and those who listen to your teaching. Your environment has a lot to do with your development. And to all Christians, Paul writes this to the church in Corinth. He says, "Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed that he," and I'll add she, "does not fall." Whether it's an elder or it's a minister or it's a member, we have a responsibility to put ourselves in spiritual context in order to grow and develop the way that God wants us to. Nobody can do that for us. In fact, you're familiar with what's often referred to as the parable of the seed. Or is it the parable of the sower? It's interesting. The sower is mentioned, I believe, once, maybe twice. The seed is mentioned a lot. But in view of our study, I like to call it the parable of environments. Because what you have is you have the exact same seed that is thrown in 4 different soils, right? But its environment is what causes it to either grow or not grow. If you're taking notes, Galatians chapter 6 verses 8 through 10 would be a good parallel to this passage. It's all sometimes referred to as the law of harvest. The person who sows of the Spirit will reap spiritual things, but the person who sows of the flesh will reap corruption. And so what you give yourself to, what you pour into your life, will be a key factor as to what the outcome of your life will be. Okay. Your environment has a lot to do with your development. The second point is this, is Jesus' voice needs to be heard above any competing noise in your life. Whereas the first point spoke about maybe the positive, this one I intentionally want to shed light on the negative. Whereas the first point, I'm trying to shed a light on a positive environment in which spiritual growth takes place. I want you to be aware that there is an environment where spiritual growth cannot take place. And I believe it's seen in this text. We don't have time to go through this text, but I will say that Paul encountered the things that Jesus prophesied here. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, starting in about verse 18 and going all the way down through 28, we have a list of things that the Apostle Paul went through that would only be evidence that they did not accept the testimony of Paul. That is while there might be many things that Paul experienced in his missionary journeys that brought great joy, planting churches, bringing lost people to Jesus, he also encountered a lot of burdens within his mission, didn't he? Among which was daily concern for the church. That's what 2 Corinthians 11:28 teaches us. But nowhere did the Apostle Paul allow that to distract him from his mission. No, he didn't allow those different negative environments dissuade him from hearing Jesus' voice. Let me say that there are environments that seek to rob our allegiance from the King. So if you are taking notes, you might want to write this question down. It's perhaps something that you could take with you, and you can look at with the verses that we just read before this, and answer this question on your own. What are some negative influences or contributing facts? It's supposed to be factors that threaten church leaders' responsibility. What are some negative factors?
Criticism.
Could be criticism that seek to threaten your ability to lead. Listening to the Word? Oh, listening to the world? Popularity? Culture? General consensus? Sometimes, Steve, even among our brethren. It might not be, Edward C. Wharton, he was one of my favorite instructors while I was at Sunset. He was not an easy instructor. He had a reputation for being the hardest instructor, which I think he took great pride in. He said once, and I remember it years ago, he said, sometimes it feels lonely in leadership. Sometimes you have to make decisions that aren't popular, even among your own people. Hobbies sometimes can get in the way. Unhealthy influences or unhealthy guides for our life can get in the way. Poor time management, that's a big one. As far as being a leader, a church leader, not being able to manage your time properly so as to give yourself the time needed to get to know, have mutual relationship with the brethren. Unwillingness, here you go. Unwillingness to have difficult conversations. I'm going to call on our speaking minister. Mike, what does the word reprove, rebuke, and admonish mean? Can you give me just a very quick definition of those words?
Well, it does mean sometimes you do have to have hard conversations with people. You have to point things out as he's talking to Timothy. Sometimes you have to point things out that aren't acceptable. You have to do it in the right spirit.
Great patience and instructions.
Sometimes people are out of line, and you have to, in a loving way, prepare for the direction they're going. You have to point out the negatives so that they will be corrected.
We can't choose which area of the responsibility we want to do. It's a tough work. And I think this is one of the things that seeks to threaten leadership, is sometimes it's tough to do that. Steve?
You're right. You can't pick and choose. Some men are better at one thing than some others.
Great point. When we think about these characteristics, we're not looking for a perfect person. God puts a team together. And there's some people who might be better at other things, certain things, than they are at other things. But it still needs to happen. Right? David?
Yes, we went to that seminar at Preston Grace Road because we went to a class called Church Conflict. And you have 3 different or 4 different people that kind of conflict different. One avoids conflict. You have some people like avoid conflict. You have some people try to know it. They see it, but they turn the head. Then you have those that
come to find out, when you talk and get down to the root of what's going on, the girl wanted the orange peel for a class project. The boy wanted the orange to eat. So once you get down to where people are at and see what the comfort is about, then you can resolve it. But you can't avoid it.
Yeah.
You can't
You can't avoid it. A lack of love for people would get in the way. How about a lack of study? How about a lack of prayer life? These things will get in the way. These are contributing factors that threaten our responsibility as leaders. Closeness to people inside the church, or a lack of. So, here's my point, and then we will be done. I'll state this, and then we'll be done. And this is, by the way, leadership is really an inside-out development. That's something that it's maybe another reason I don't like to use the word qualifications, is because we're really just looking on the outside sometimes, not all the time. I think a lot of people look on the outside with really considering what's on the inside. What comes into your life is the single most important factor of what your life will become. What do you allow to come into your life, good or bad? Your environment, right? And in the voice or in the face of conflicts, whose voice do you hear? Who did Paul hear? Did he let the outsiders, or even the troubles that he had with the insiders, which you know he did? He did have some trouble with some folks on the inside. I mean, read 2 Corinthians. I would say 75% of the letter is a defense in which he is trying to affirm the relationship and his love for them, because people on the inside have made some accusations about the intent of his previous letters. What comes into your life is the single most important factor of what your life will become. So really it is an inward focus that seeks to develop self-awareness in view of God's will for me as a person. I hope this has been an encouragement to you. I want to say that I am incredibly grateful for our Sunday night crew. I know it's the end of the day, it's the beginning of a new week, and you could be doing other things. But you chose to be here, and I kind of feel it's a special group. And so I'm incredibly grateful for you. If you're not planning to stay for Roundhouse, you're missing out. Because Tyler does a great job with his Roundhouse, plus my wife made Susie Q's. Anybody ever hear her called that? Slappy Joe's? Slap at Joe, slap at Joe? No? Did little Adam Sandler? Okay. They call them like 10 different things up in South Dakota. But if you're not planning on staying for that, got a delayed laugher over there, I could relate with that, then please stay for that. At this time, we're going to have a song of encouragement. If you need to respond to the message in any way, if there's something that this church could do for you, please let us know. As together we stand and sing.